Well, good evening, and I have to begin by acknowledging Mr. Orzak, whose considerable assistance made this possible after it was not to happen, and I also have to acknowledge my compatriots and providers for a just peace, who did so much work also to make this happen lovely. Jamie Brooks. You can see his very fine work every day on our website, btjp.org. Several years ago on this campus, there was a panel presentation on Israel to Palestine that I participated in. And a respected Jewish professor on his faculty stood up near the end of the student's historical overview of the conflict, one that was admittedly critical of Israel, the United States, and Zionism. And he started yelling at the student, and then at one of my co-panelists. Since he didn't know me personally, he spared me. He unjustly and abusively accused them of lying or distorting the historical record of the conflict and of fomenting anti-Semitism. He was prevailed upon to leave the room by one of the event's organizers who threatened to call security. He did not cease his tirade. Well, he did cease, and he did leave. And I tell you this not because of the tirade, which frankly did not surprise me, but because of what happened afterwards. As the evening came to a close, several students came down and asked questions of the panelists, myself included, which was fine. But we had set aside a Q&A session that night, 4 questions. And we got very few from the audience. And I asked one of the students, why did you wait until the evening broke up to ask a question? And he said, well, after the professor's outburst, I didn't feel comfortable speaking. I didn't want people to think I was an anti-Semite. And there were several students nearby who nodded their head in agreement. Now what that professor did, very successfully, was to silence students at a prestigious public university, intimidate them into silence, afraid to ask questions, afraid to make comments because they might be perceived as anti-Semitic. The Israel lobby in this country has been doing the same thing for decades, on a much vaster scale. And I think for many of us who've been involved in this issue, some of us for decades, it felt for a very long time that we could not talk about the lobby, except in Palestine solidarity service. We couldn't get the media to listen to us about the Israel lobby. And so when our distinguished guest tonight, Stephen Walt, and his colleague, John Mearsheimer, began writing about the Israel lobby, first in the form of a lengthy article in the London Review of Books, and later as a book that became an international bestseller, it felt as though a major political barrier had finally been breached, and that it would now be possible to begin talking about this issue critically, fairly, open-mindedly. And in fact, that is indeed what has begun to happen, thanks to their fine academic work. Vermonters for a Just Peace in Palestine, Israel co-sponsored this event because it is not acceptable to remain silent or to intimidate people into silence when Gaza is dying and when the West Bank continues to be sliced and diced in order to justify and permit the expansion of illegal Jewish settlements and to seize the territory's natural resources. If a just peace is what we all desire, a just peace, we must grapple with the questions and the issues that Stephen Walt has illuminated in his research writings and public speeches. What do we mean by the Israel lobby? Who or what comprises it? How is it structured? Is it monolithic? Or is it multifaceted? How is it funded, and how does it spend its money? What is the extent of its influence in the making of U.S. foreign policy and in the shaping of domestic opinion and behavior on the question of Palestine? And for our purposes tonight, assuming that the Obama administration is committed to brokering a peace process consistent with international law, what role or roles will the lobby play? How will it exert its influence and power, and with what consequences? Stephen Walt is eminently qualified to address this issue and many others. He is the Robert and Renée Belfer Professor of International Relations at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, where he served as academic dean from 2002 to 2006. He previously taught at Princeton University and the University of Chicago. He's a contributing editor at Foreign Policy Magazine, co-editor of the Cornell Studies in Security Affairs, and co-chair of the editorial board of the journal International Security. He was elected a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in May of 2005. Professor Walt is the author of numerous articles and books on international relations, national security policy, and U.S. foreign policy. His books include The Origins of Alliances, which received the 1988 Edgar S. Furness National Security Book Award, and Taming American Power, the Global Response to U.S. Primacy, which was a finalist for the Lionel Gelber International Affairs Book Award and the Arthur Ross Booker Prize. His most recent book, The Israel Lobby and the U.S. Foreign Policy, co-authored with John Mearsheimer, was a New York Times bestseller and has been translated into more than 20 languages. His daily weblog can be found at walt.foreignpolicy.com. Would you please join me now in welcoming to the University of Vermont, Dr. Stephen Walt.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I do want to thank Mark for the original invitation and for his extraordinary patience in finding or waiting until I could find the time to actually drive up here. It's really not that far, but I've been busy. In any case, my topic today is American foreign policy, and I want to talk in particular about the role of the so-called Israel lobby. But I want to start by acknowledging why it can be difficult to talk about this subject and why I think it has to be handled with a certain degree of sensitivity. If I were here to talk about, say, energy policy, it would be natural for me to talk about the political activities of oil companies and what they do to try and shape public policy. If I were here to talk about gun control, and I didn't bring up the National Rifle Association, you'd think I was leaving something important out of the story. If I were talking about health care, and I didn't talk about, pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies or things like that, you would go away thinking you'd been shortchanged, that I'd left a key part of the story out. But if you turn the subject to Middle East policy, and then you bring up the Israel lobby, you are putting your finger in a light socket. You're going to face immediate and heated criticism. Now that's partly because there are some groups and individuals in the lobby who are very quick to attack anyone who disagrees with them on Middle East policy and things that they are advocating. But I think it's also because this is a topic, this is a discussion that takes place in the shadow of centuries of anti-Semitism, and some of that includes some bizarre conspiracy theories like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and of course tragic events like the Holocaust, and that history shapes how we all think and talk about this issue. So if you talk about an interest group in the United States that is mostly, but by no means exclusively, comprised of some Jewish Americans, some people may think you're saying there's some kind of secret cabal or conspiracy to control American foreign policy. If you say that media coverage in the United States tends to take a pro-Israel point of view, it sounds to some people like you're making the old sort of Jews control the media charge. If you talk about campaign contributions made by pro-Israel PACs, for example, some people will think you are saying that Jewish money is doing something illegal or improper or inappropriate. I want to make it very clear at the outset that my co-author and I reject every one of those various anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. For us, the Israel lobby is an interest group, like lots of other interest groups in the United States. Its activities are legitimate forms of democratic political participation. We don't question Israel's legitimacy. We don't question its right to exist. In fact, we say in our book that the United States should come to Israel's aid if its survival is ever in jeopardy. But at the same time, we also think that the influence of the lobby, and indeed Middle East foreign policy more generally, is something that reasonable people ought to be able to talk about in a fairly calm and open way, the same way we would talk about any other public policy issue and the various groups that try and shape public policy on that issue. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the special relationship, then describe the lobby and how it works, and then talk about its impact on American policy, and there I'll focus primarily on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is this special relationship that now exists? Well, the late Yitzhak Rabin once said that American support for Israel was, quote, beyond compare in modern history. And he was right. It's the largest recipient of American economic and military aid. It works out to about $500 per year for each Israeli citizen. And that, by the way, that aid is given even though Israel is no longer a poor country. Its GDP per capita is now 29th in the world, so it's a fairly prosperous country now. Moreover, Israel gets this aid even when it does things that the United States opposes, like building settlements in the West Bank.